Welcome back to the Racial Draft Podcast. I am your host, Michael Ford, and this is another episode where we change the complexion of the comic book universe one draft pick at a time. We are here on a President's Day here in the States, and we are celebrating democracy in a manner of speaking as we democratize these comic book characters in round seven of the season seven racial draft. Let's jump right in. Riddle me this. The first pick of the round was the South Asian delegation and their selection of Ed Nigma, aka the Riddler. Obviously, this is a character that we have seen depicted traditionally as white. Um, the notable exception, I suppose, would be the audio depiction of this character played by Hassan Minhaj. Um, I've listened to this podcast. I think he did a pretty good job, and even in the podcast, he was in fact reimagined as South Asian, and brought a different spin to the character, one that we have yet to have fully seen play out in any kind of live action or animated um, incarnation. But you know, I personally would be open to that change, and it does look like the people are kind of alongside me in terms of the thought process, with 77.8% approval rating for South Asian Riddler, and particularly as depicted by Hassan Minaj, 78.6% approval rating. So pretty good. Fairly positive reception to that draft pick. We will see whether the other draft picks of the round hold up. As always, you can make your opinions known about these racial draft picks here on Twitter, which I'm currently streaming live, but also on racialdraft.com, which is our main website. We are also found on YouTube. Maybe you're watching me after the fact on YouTube, in audio form, of course. I am on all of the various podcast platforms. The podcast is. You can also find us on Instagram slash threads, where we're trying to diversify our different platforms, and also little bit of dabbling on TikTok. So I'm a little bit out of the TikTok target audience as far as the age range, but I do my best. I do my best. But moving on from pick number one in the round to pick number two, and that brings us to the Polynesian delegation. They have selected Victor Stone, aka Cyborg, as a Samoan. Those of you who do follow football very closely do know that one of the more represented demographics in football are Samoans, people of Samoan descent. And for that reason, I think that this is a situation where reimagining Victor Stone, Cyborg, a former football player turned cyborg, could actually work. In this particular instance, there was a fan cast of Beulah Kaole, is how his name's pronounced. I apologize if I mispronounced his name. You might know him from the movie Next Goal Wins. Um, and he does tend to sort of resemble the way that Cyborg is traditionally depicted. So for me, it's a thumbs up. As far as the people are, as of now, 100% approval, 100% approving of Samoan Cyborg. And as far as the fan cast, a little bit less, 60% approval rating, with 40% strongly approving, 20% somewhat approving, 20% somewhat disapproving, 20% racist. But we move on to the third pick of the round, and that third pick comes to us from the Swana Mena delegation. This is a character that's been selected before. That would be Sergei Kravenov, aka Craven the Hunter, to be of Turkish descent. There are people of Turkish descent in Russia. As we know, Craven's story does have him being kind of a a game hunter, the hunter of the most dangerous game, as it were, superpowered man or Spider Man. But yes, Sergey, does tend to be depicted as more of a brown man than one of the upper crust, even though his family does have money. So I think there's a little bit of room for ethnic diversity in terms of how Craven is depicted. And I think that like I said, there were it's a sizable Turkish population in Russia. So for that reason, works for me. The people works for them for the most part as well. 80% approval rating for Turkish Craven, and the fan cast, Numan Akar, who you might know from Spider-Man: Far From Home. Yeah, I was get confused about the homes, but yes, he played I believe a character named Dimitri in Spider-Man: Far From Home, but only 50% approval rating for the fan cast. Despite the fact that I do remember back when he was cast for that movie, a lot of people thought he might have been playing Craven. We will back we'll get back into the picks in just a moment. Um, I accidentally closed the window. Sorry, but yeah, for the fourth pick, we move on to wait for it, wait for it. Yes, the white delegation. And who better for the white delegation to select than Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, aka the guy who, at least in the Avengers MCU universe, kind of went on a little bit of a murder spree that was quickly forgiven because, that's what you do. Forgive the white man for his transgressions. Clint has always been a little bit problematic, even in his comic book depictions. He said some questionable, borderline racist things over his history in comics. He's often known for screwing up and somehow being accepted back into the fray. And if there's being able to fail upwards, I would say is one of the hallmarks of white privilege. And Hawkeye, Clint Barton, being the kind of person who continues to fail and continues to not necessarily deal with the consequences of those actions. Standard white guy stuff. So for that reason, I'm cool with it. Right now, we're looking at 83.3% approval rating for still white Hawkeye. I would imagine that 16.7 disapproval is more about the fact that you know he's Hawkeye, less so that you know less so that this disapproval rating is tied to of disapproving of Hawkeye remaining white. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. He really should be white. Um, Sorry guys, having a little more technical difficulty, but I'll get right back into it in a moment. So yeah, we'll keep at it, moving from the fourth pick of the round to the fifth pick of the round. And this is another pick that I suppose is influenced by the MCU. This would be from the multiracial delegation. They have selected Mary Jane Watson, or MJ, if you prefer. And, their fan cast for her was Zendaya. And, I mean, obviously, we haven't seen her depicted in the manner that Mary Jane is depicted in the comic books, that being of supermodel, despite the fact that Zendaya herself is is a model of some renown. So a lot of us are looking forward to that quote unquote jackpot moment. Obviously, in the comics, she's now taken on the superhero persona of Jackpot. So remains to be seen whether that's a direction that they will take it in live action. I would imagine probably not, as Jackpot still remains as part of the one of the Sony universe of Marvel characters that has done so well, so to speak, in the box office. Shout out to Madam Web. But the people are a little bit down on multiracial Mary Jane. I was surprised by that. Only 40% approval rating, with all 40% strongly approving of multiracial Mary Jane, and 40% somewhat disapprove, and 20% racist. With respect to Zendaya's casting, a little bit better, 62.5% approval rating. So, like I said, better. Still not as high as I expected. So 37.5 strongly approve, 25% somewhat approve, 25% somewhat disapprove, and 12.5% strongly disapprove. Which again, do you have eyes? I'm not sure. Not sure about that. But anyway, we will press ahead. Continuing on, we had one archer this round, and we're going to have another archer. This one from the East Southeast Asian delegation, and that would be Roy Harper, aka Arsenal. There's not too much to say about Roy Harper. I mean, he hasn't played a major role in comics. He died, came back, so that's a thing that happened. He was also at one point drug addict. I was gonna use a more disparaging term, but he was used for a very special episode of Green Arrow, as he kind of went on his dark Dark Night of the Soul. I think that's how it's generally termed. But again, he remains an incredible archer despite having dabbled a lot in screwing up. And I think in the same way that I had mentioned before, that one thing that Hawkeye is known for is his many screw ups. Roy is also known for his screw ups, but maybe not as much for escaping accountability for those screw ups. So for that reason, I can totally see him being reimagined as a person of color. However, I think that just in terms of the way we stereotype East Asian people, in characters in media, it's a little bit less of compatible with those stereotypes. Not to say that this couldn't be a way of breaking, particularly given that the East Southeast Asian delegation had selected Oliver Queen as a character as well. So you're dealing with one East Asian character mentoring another East Asian character. There's a little bit of room for sure for them, for that relationship to sort of explore those kinds of dynamics. And I would imagine that's why we're currently looking at 100% approval rating for East Asian Roy Harper. People seeing the potential in that pairing. Now, I apologize in advance for not knowing much about this actor that was fan cast to play Roy Harper, Makenyu, who's I believe a Japanese actor / model. I'm not familiar with his work, so I don't have a strong opinion as to whether he would do a good job as Roy Harper. But according to the people, he's at 90% approval rating, 60% strongly approved, 30% somewhat approved. So positive reaction for sure for East Asian Roy Harper. We're already in the second half of the round. We are just whizzing along. And who better than Ben Grimm, The Thing, just recently announced as his casting, his official casting in the MCU. But drafted by the Jewish delegation to remain Jewish as a defensive pick, and I'm shocked and appalled that the approval rating is only 87.5% approval, which means that someone out here with their 12.5 strongly disapprove is anti-Semitic. Shame on you. Shame on you. 87.5 though, approval rating for still Jewish Ben Grimm, and Ebon Moss-Bachrach, who you might know from The Bear, Cousin. You might also know him from Andor. He's the official fan cast. Sorry, the official casting, but also the fan cast for the Jewish delegation. And his approval rating is a little lower, 71.4% approval, with 57.1 strongly approving, 14.3 somewhat approving, 14.3 somewhat disapproving, and 14.3 again anti-Semitic. But seriously though, those of you who don't approve of the casting, let me know your thoughts. Hit us up on the various platforms, on Twitter, in email, racialdraftpodcast@gmail.com, with your long form thoughts. I'd love to hear why you don't think that he's a good casting for the role. I've not seen The Bear, but those of the people that I trust that have seen the show think that he would nail the role. I do remember when he played Micro on The Punisher, and I thought he was very good at that, but obviously totally different kind of character than Ben Grimm. So again, love to hear your thoughts. We're always open to hearing out the diversity of opinion, even though for a while it's just been me here hosting solo. Moving on from one probably not controversial pick to one that might be a little bit more controversial, and that is Jen Walters, aka She-Hulk, for the Black delegation. Now, we've talked about this before, that in my personal opinion, I think that Jen Walters is the kind of character that is well positioned as white, because of the sort of idea that how she's perceived in the world isn't seen as competent and powerful and assertive. And when she adopts the She-Hulk persona, who She-Hulk is very much perceived as vivacious and more adventurous and more sexual. Basically, the same dichotomy that sometimes exists in pop culture with respect to white women versus women of color exists inside of Jen Walters and her She-Hulk persona. Now, granted, that is a little bit problematic. I fully acknowledge that. And I think that, by her being a woman of color who perhaps isn't seen that way, whether because of social norms or, society kind of hampering her and making her feel like she needs to fit a particular Eurocentric mold. Maybe that's an even better way to get at those aspects, critique the sort of broader white feminist critique, of She-Hulk, by having a Black woman, but a lighter skinned Black woman, who feels more compelled to, in her Jennifer Walters alter ego, sort of be perceived or portray herself in such a way that she's not necessarily white passing, but white, pursuing white acceptance in corporate America, but then becoming She-Hulk and realizing that she can kind of have it all. I think that would be an interesting spin on the character. It's not one that we've gotten fully fleshed out by the Black delegation, but these are just ideas that I have thrown out. But I think that the fan cast kind of goes to this point. Ruth Nega, I don't know if you're familiar with. I mean, I am. I watched a lot of her stuff, but she was in a movie called Passing, where her character actually had to grapple with that idea. Obviously, it's set in a different time frame, not in the modern time, but being a black woman that's had to struggle under the white gaze. I think that could be, like I said, a dimension that could be brought to a black She-Hulk that wouldn't be brought to a white version of She-Hulk, where in a lot of ways, she's sort of appropriating culture. So, I'm here for it. Is the short answer there is that I'm here for it. The people they're here for it for the most part. 66.7% approval rating, not too shabby. 40% strongly approved, 26.7 somewhat approved, 13.3 somewhat disapproved, but 20% racist. With the fan cast, 61.5, so even lower approval rating for Ruth Nega, and all 61.5 strongly approving, but there's 15.4 somewhat disapproving and 23.1 strongly disapproving of the casting. And again, another situation where I'd love to hear from the audience, hear from different listeners and different people who saw the pick as to their perspective of why they liked or disliked both the pick and the fan cast. We are into the final two picks of the round, and they happen to have something in common. First pick, Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage. Now, I have mentioned before, I've been on record before as this Carnage character being, kind of Spider-Man universe's answer to the Joker, with even more chilling power set. He's one of the characters that Peter Parker can't really reason himself around, can't find the good in, because there's probably no good in Cletus Cassidy. And as a person that's lived out in the world, I think that his sort of everything about this character, kind of is read as and could be read as white. I think it's a little harder to imagine him being something other than white. Obviously, there's the Cletus Cassidy of it all, the southern, the southern nature of it. He almost needs a middle name so that he can sort of fit that mold of a serial killer. Obviously, he is a serial killer in the comics, but to the extent that serial killers get racially profiled, they do generally profile as white. He's got red hair, which is another category that tends to over-index as white. But we are dealing here with a racial draft pick by the Latinx delegation, and it is possible to be both white and Latino. Possible to have red hair as a Latino. Cletus Cassidy is a little harder to spin off, but I would imagine that it's not impossible to work. But I do think that being read as white is an important piece of the Carnage puzzle. So it's a little trickier for me to really kind of make work. And I imagine that that's what's happening here in terms of the approval rating, because right now it's 50-50, 50% approving and 50% disapproving, with 12.5 strongly approving, 37.5 somewhat approving, 12.5 somewhat disapproving, and 37.5% strongly disapproving, of a Latino Carnage. And maybe there's also an element to which, when you have a character that's that evil, that's kind of irredeemably evil, that those of us who are men of color don't necessarily want that on our slate. We don't want to be associated with that, with an irredeemably evil character. So I can see that. I can definitely see why many of us would not want to approve of Carnage being imagined in that way. Takes us from one symbiote host to another symbiote, as it were, and we're dealing with the Native American delegation, and they have chosen to draft Dylan Brock, son of Eddie Brock. I believe a big part of his story is that for the longest time he thought that he was Eddie's younger brother, as their father. Well, sorry, his grandfather, Eddie's father, raised him in secret, and well, not in secret, but as secretly his grandfather and not his father. But over in the recent years, now that his parentage has been discovered and Eddie is fully taking on the role of caretaker, we've seen Dylan kind of inherit his father's relationship with the various Clintar symbiotes, including the main Venom symbiote, who is sometimes takes the form of a pet. Actually, a number of symbiotes take the form of a pet, so it's an interesting dynamic where you have some of the subtext of Venom as a man with his pet symbiote, and then a child with his pet symbiote that helps protect him as he navigates early adolescence. I personally am not current with all the Venom comics, so I need to get caught up. But obviously, the Native American delegation has already drafted Eddie Brock, and I think that to the extent that that character works, I think that having Dylan Brock also as a host for the symbiote also works. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how they plan to implement that with with his backstory, whether they want to reimagine it or you know sort of stick with things that we already know about the Eddie Brock character. But I really can't have much of an objection to Dylan Brock being reimagined as Native American. As of now, it's 66.6%. So 2/3 of the audience does approve of that. If you feel differently, by all means, there's more than enough time for you to go to Twitter or X if you're one of those people. Cast your votes, your approval votes, or racialdraft.com and cast your approval votes there, or both. I mean, no one's checking there. It's different places and different strokes. But yeah, like I said, kind of ran through it a little bit, little quick hit of the seventh round of the racial draft. We are into the second half of the season draft, but there's still a lot of characters left on the board, still a lot of opportunities for the race bending and the reimagining that has characterized the racial draft over 7 seasons. Wow, it is. We have been racking up the seasons. And again, if this is your first episode, I apologize. But go back and check out the old episodes. I keep promising that we're gonna have guests. It's been a while since we've had one, but anything can change. Anything can change, and we'll leave it there. As always, you can find us at Racial Draft Pod on Twitter, racial.draft on Instagram and Threads, on Facebook as well, Racial Draft, and on YouTube where you can subscribe and maybe even like us. But until next time, all things are possible.